We begin with some sad news today, and that is the death of Treat Williams.
Yes.
This is horrible. This is really sad. 71 years old. He was killed in a motorcycle accident in Vermont.
Yeah. And, still a very busy and active actor, in recent years, had been doing actually a lot of Hallmark stuff. Like I was watching the Criterion extras for Smooth Talk, which we did for, I believe, an off the menu for our Patreon members.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about watching his character in that movie, who was like a complete sociopath. He's like, how did that guy become the Hallmark dad? But Hallmark dad he was recently, and those were great. But obviously his career goes back to the 70s, stuff like Prince of the City and Hair and The Ritz, which he's very funny in. Just had a really extraordinary career and was still hitting it. And this is really just an out of left field tragedy.
Really sad. Like leading man, handsome, and had that presence, but also did a lot of interesting character work. Began on stage. John Travolta had a sad remembrance of them coming up in the New York theater together. They were both in Grease together.
Oh, wow.
And then our friend Larry Karaszewski had some nice things to say about him, about how Milos Forman had introduced them to each other because they had both worked with him. And the last thing he just wrapped production on was the next installment of Ryan Murphy's Feud.
Oh, really? Okay.
He plays Bill Paley in it. It's about Truman Capote and how he betrayed all of his wealthy New York socialite ladies, his swans.
Okay.
And so in this film, the series out there, there's an eight episode thing that Gus Van Sant is directing that Treat Williams plays. Bill Paley in that, legendary television pioneer Bill Paley. So very sad. Yeah. What an awful loss. Box office we have for you, Transformers, #1. It made $61 million to knock Spider-Verse off the top spot of the box office. But Across the Spider-Verse in just 10 days, its first 10 days, has made more than the first Into the Spider-Verse made over its entire theatrical run.
Wow. Okay.
It's made $225 million in 10 days.
And I know they, for people who track this sort of thing, the second weekend drop off was considered to be pretty good. It wasn't, this massive thing where everybody came out the first weekend and then disappeared. So, it's going to be leggy, as they like to say. It'll
be leggy. And it's the kind of movie you can't just see once, I don't think, because it's just crammed with details. And so you want to go back and rewatch it and catch all those things. And it's just such a joyful experience. Why not go back and watch it again? So that'll be big all summer long, I'm sure. The Hollywood Foreign Press Association is finally shutting down.
R.I.P., I guess. Yeah, that was never a predictable twist in this entire saga. But the Golden Globes apparently live on, but who's voting for them? No one seems to know.
Right. So they're now for profit, which they were secretly before. And now.
I mean, here's the thing. I've worked with Outfest for years, and every year they'd get a nice check from the HFPA. They supported Film Independent. A lot of nonprofit film organizations in town, were beneficiaries of the HFPA's largesse. So yes, were there other hinky accounting practices with their membership? Probably, but they were at least very generous with those members. But I think that with those organizations, rather, and I think that there is still a foundation aspect to all of this. So hopefully they will continue that largesse for those groups. But yeah, this is all now pretty much coming under the umbrella of Dick Clark Productions and Penske Media, which runs Variety and The Hollywood Reporter and Deadline. So it's okay, I see what this is going to look like. I'm sure.
Very chummy still, right? It's not going to be not above board or separation of church and state at all.
Oh, heck no. If my former employers at the Wrap haven't already dug into this, I'm sure they will by the end of the week, because yikes.
Yeah. And so what will become of the actual Golden Globe ceremony, right? Which was always star-studded. And that was often a wag the dog thing where you figure people would get nominated because they're stars. They
wanted them to show up. Yeah.
Whether or not they deserved it for the work they did that year.
Yeah. The 2024 Globes will be the last year in which the HFPA actually votes, although it will be the newly expanded HFPA, who always had 100-ish members. Now they've got 315. They really tried to expand and, get more diverse. And then after that, it becomes this privately held thing.
Among the people who will probably be at the Golden Globes are Matt Damon and Ben Affleck for Air. I love this story. This is so hilarious. So Trump gets indicted, right? And puts out a fundraising ad using Matt Damon's monologue from Air, like the big cell in the conference room when he's finally got Michael Jordan in front of him, totally inspiring. Trump's people take that and they juxtapose it with images of him being like persecuted and like a victim, but he's going to come back stronger. So clearly the second I saw that, I'm like, oh, this is not going to last long.
No.
So Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, through their production company, have put out a statement saying, no, we do not approve of this and we do not condone it, and stop.
This is a classic ask forgiveness rather than permission sitch.
Right. And for years, like, they used Tom Petty songs at Trump rallies. Like, no. Let's talk about the French Connection. This is the thing that came out last week that we didn't get to. So I have not actually seen this, but I have read many articles about how the edited version of the French Connection, the 1971 Gene Hackman classic, William Friedkin classic, edits out a section of dialogue between Roy Scheider and Gene Hackman in which they are talking about people in New York with some unsavory language, some racial slurs, the kind of language these people would use as New York cops to describe the citizenry of
and
various...
that movies of that era felt free to include. Completely,
because that's the kind of wording that they would use. And so now when you watch it, it has been like sanitized and that section's been taken out and it cuts to a different part of that conversation. It's the same kind of mentality as we saw with like Roald Dahl books being sanitized to take out references to people being fat or ugly. And it's disturbing because this language existed. And so to just eliminate it entirely means that no one learns anything, right? People need to learn from this language that it was not okay, but it existed and it was true, right? To that era.
I think there's two lanes here. I mean, like, I think with books that are aimed at kids, maybe, yes, you do some minor changes along the way, but obviously the historical record remains and, whatever. But I think like with an R-rated movie, it just has to live the way that it is. And, Disney Plus is the one that gave us, outdated cultural representations, when they tried to sort of, show older, cartoons and stuff that had, the crows in Dumbo or whatever. Like, we can't pretend that stuff didn't happen, but certainly it's something that's aimed at adults.
Yeah.
You just say, look, this was a 70s movie. Like most 70s and 80s movies have lots of content that is currently considered problematic, and it should be considered problematic, but those movies still should, as you say, exist in the way that they were first made. And so again, this is my argument for physical media, because Disney on the streaming versions can go in and change stuff. So like if you watch the French Connection on the Criterion channel, you're still watching the Disney approved version of the streaming thing.
And that's crazy. On Criterion, that's crazy.
If you have the Blu-ray, however, no one can touch it, So yeah, I this is appalling and just another reason why streaming, while it has many benefits and many conveniences, like you can buy things on Amazon and still have them disappear one day. You don't really own it unless you own a physical copy of the movie.
Well, let us know if you have seen this version and what you think of it, because I just think it's an appalling prospect that things like that are just going to get, a classic like that's going to get tweaked in that way. And then we have Michael Shannon talking to Collider recently about revisiting his role as General Zod in The Flash, which comes out this Friday. We already reviewed it, so take a look for that. He's barely in it. Like, he's in it so little that you and I forgot to even mention him in a whole full review of The Flash. But he says that coming back to the character this time wasn't quite as satisfying as it was when he played him in what was it, Man of Steel?
Man of Steel. Well, because in that movie he's a character, and in this movie he's basically a plot device. Like, there's no moment where he's doing anything but sort of announcing his intentions and like fighting a bunch of people on green screen. So yeah, I would be bored too if I were Michael Shannon, because there's nothing for him to play. And this feeds into, have you seen the Paste article about how IP is destroying cinema?
No.
I highly recommend it, because they talk about how like that actors now are so often not really getting to give performances. They're just sort of stepping into these already known characters and just sort of being their avatar, whether it's, Mario or Thor or whatever, when you're hearing from people like Chris Hemsworth and Elizabeth Olsen, they're like, yeah, I'm kind of done with Marvel. There's not much for me to do there. It's not a challenge. And more, I think these movies are not really calling upon actors to do anything but just sort of be this thing that already and stand there and embody it in flesh and blood, but not really do much else with it.
Like a plug and play kind of thing.
Exactly.
You stand here and it's all going to happen around you with computers.
With this costume on, and the fans will love it.
Yikes. Giant article, speaking of articles, huge article in Vanity Fair going deep into the ugly Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie divorce, but specifically about Miraval, the French winery that they co-own. Although she sold her half to a Russian billionaire, which he is not happy about. So it's a dispute over like money because they bought this place in theory to be this idyllic retreat from the pressures of superstardom and the scrutiny that they have to endure, you know, living among mortals. But they bought this place for their children to grow up where they could just have this idyllic getaway. But it also became a really profitable winery for them. They're known for their rosé. And so it's very, very in-depth about the breakup, about the documents, about, you know, things that had been sealed, which she then fought through the Freedom of Information Act to get out and get unredacted. So if you've got a half an hour or so.
I'm still reeling from the Vanity Fair story about how terrible the Lost Writers Room was.
I needed to read that. I've not read that. Was that good?
Yeah, it's a doozy.
Okay. And then speaking of doozies, Pat Sajak, everyone, he is leaving Wheel of Fortune after 41 seasons. He's too busy hanging out with Marjorie Taylor Greene and tweeting. How is he allowed to tweet right-wing stuff when you are the face of this totally family-friendly franchise and have been for decades? Like, how is he allowed from a brand perspective to be so polarizing?
I think it's the when you have been for decades part. Well, I mean, you know, Chuck Woolery's just as bad, although I don't know if he was doing it while he was still employed. I think it's because Merv Griffin died. I think that's when things really got slack over there.
I was on both those game shows.
Ooh.
I was on Wheel of Fortune and Scrabble early on in Pat's tenure in 1986. I didn't realize what it was all about. But anyway, he's taken off, and apparently Whoopi Goldberg's already saying she wants that gig.
Sure, great, yeah, why not? I mean, it's steady, and she clearly is very happy to just like be on TV and be, you know, like a presence there. So yeah, why not? Great.
I would tune in.